Sydney is one of the most unaffordable cities in the world. Bright, sandy beaches, a safe, stable government, generous tax laws, and an open migration policy have made homes in the iconic city a valuable commodity, but also an essential commodity, increasingly out of reach for people who work regular jobs and make a regular salary. The story of Sydney's housing market is a warning to the world of what can happen when things are allowed to go too far. But what doesn't get much attention is what's left behind. Sydney is designed from the ground up to be extremely punishing to the working majority that can't keep up with real estate that makes more money than they do. The trend has become so noticeable that local economists and city planners have divided the city along the latte line. Everyone living on this side of the line enjoys the picturesque cafe culture of the city, and if you live on this side of the line, you're probably the person making the lattes. Other locals have drawn an even more serious connection. Red Rooster is an Australian fast food chain that caters predominantly to working-class, budget-conscious households. All of the Red Rooster franchises in Sydney are spread out up to this invisible line that splits the city. On this side of the line, there are affluent suburbs nestled along Sydney's iconic harbour. This is home to some of the most expensive real estate in the world. This townhouse, which doesn't even have a working bathroom, sold for over $4 million this year because it was located just 15 minutes from the CBD. Properties only go up from there. A penthouse apartment just up the road from Sydney Opera House recently sold for $90 million before construction had even finished. And this home in the suburb of Point Piper is currently listed for $130 million American dollars, with the expectation that it will probably sell for more. The problem is that the city itself is built around a harbour that's actually quite small. To keep up with population growth, most living areas have sprawled outwards towards the west. Out here, homes on the other side of the latte line are still expensive. This 3-bedroom townhouse sold for over $1 million. But it did come with a working bathroom and front door. The difference is, while homes out here are more affordable, if you consider $1 million townhouses affordable, all of life's other essentials are far more expensive. Most of the highest paying jobs in Sydney are located here in the central business district. To get there from this $1 million townhouse via car would cost $25 one way in unavoidable toll charges. Once the return trip and fuel is considered, many households out here are spending more than $400 a week just to get to work. Someone getting into work from Bellevue Hill, an idyllic suburb in the city's east, where homes start at $5 million, would pay no tolls, or they could catch a heavily subsidized public ferry right into the heart of the city for $2.76. Public transportation is also available back out here, but services get more and more limited the further past this line you go. Someone wanting to get public transport from their home in Jordan Springs would need to drive to a bus stop, catch a bus, and then 2 connecting trains to get into the city. The entire route would take more than an hour and a half one way, and still cost $25. The average income for someone living in this suburb is just 750 Australian dollars, the equivalent of around 500 American. That means that the majority of someone's income would be eaten by transport costs just because they weren't rich enough to live on the right side of the line. This isn't to mention the 15 additional hours spent every week just getting to work. But the price of being on the wrong side of the latte line doesn't stop there. Speed cameras and police traffic enforcement are denser on the poor side of the line. One such speed camera out of hundreds across the city is set up along the M8 highway, one of the few thoroughfares connecting the two halves of Sydney. This one camera issued over $1.3 million in fines in a single month, mostly going to commuters coming from areas with incomes well below the city's average. All of this additional expense erodes any savings that a person would need to buy a home on the right side of the line. This is a problem for all of Sydney, even the people who do live in the affluent suburbs. Urban sprawl is ultimately unsustainable. At some point, it takes too long and costs too much for people to travel to the city to serve lattes in the suburbs on the right side of the line. There are already other options. Sydney has a smaller metropolitan centre in its west called Parramatta. A lot of major companies have secondary offices out here in addition to their headquarters in the city. It's much more convenient for people living in the west to work in Parramatta, and a lot cheaper too. But companies know this and they take advantage of it. An entry-level job in Parramatta, even with the same company, will pay significantly less than exactly the same job in the central business district. Workers from out west can either make less money in business centres like Parramatta, or make more money in the city just to give it right back in travel costs. But there's more than transport that crushes people on this side of the line. Average local tax rates are far higher in remote suburbs when adjusted for house prices and income. Some suburbs on the right side of the line are older than the country itself, so they've had a long time to build roads, utilities, parks, and other local amenities already. All that these local taxes need to do is maintain what's already there. Suburbs out on the other side of the line, though, are newer. Many of them have been constructed from the ground up within the last 2 decades. These suburbs were greenfield developments that converted agricultural land into dense suburban housing. They need to build all their infrastructure from scratch, and it's the new residents that end up paying for it in one way or another, and that's if they get the same amenities at all. The urban developers that are building these new suburbs have a financial interest to provide what's going to make them money, and that is new housing that they can provide to desperate first home buyers at a price that is just below what the market can bear. They don't have a financial interest to provide public amenities like parks, schools, and shopping centres because they don't deliver returns as quickly as a new house. This has led to a phenomenon called dormitory suburbs, where entire neighbourhoods only exist as a place for people to sleep. If people do want anything else, they have to get in their car and travel a significant distance because the suburbs where they live are filled with nothing but houses. The haphazard urban planning of the outer developments has created yet another problem for the city's working class as well: heat deserts. Australia is hot. Most of the country is a desert with very few exceptions. The rich areas on this side of the line close to the coast and built around the water are one of those exceptions. But average temperatures on this side of the line are 5 to 10 degrees hotter during the hottest days of the year. The distance from the water isn't the only factor here. Most of the suburbs try to cram as much housing as possible onto land parcels to maximize returns for the property developers who build them. But that means that trees and greenery are removed to make way for more houses and bitumen cul-de-sacs. The urban fashion also calls for black roofs and houses that have little to no insulation to try and save money wherever possible. Since people in Sydney are already struggling to afford these homes, the cheapest listings will get sold the quickest, and builders know this, so they cut down on costs wherever they can, even if they know it will end up costing the new owner much more in the long run. People in these suburbs need to run their air conditioning practically non-stop throughout the hot Australian summer, and if they can't afford to pay that much for electricity, well, in many cases, they just die. Unfortunately, sometimes they don't even have a choice, because Sydney also has 2 different electrical grids, one for the rich side of the line and another one for the poor. The network on this side of the line services a smaller, more population-dense area, so energy is actually cheaper for those who can afford to live here. The power grid on this side of the line is generally more expensive, and it's harder to connect solar systems to, which could offset the cost of cooling homes by taking advantage of that famous Australian sun. The grid in the west is also more prone to power outages, leaving people without vital air conditioning to keep cool during days that could top 45 degrees Celsius or 113 degrees Fahrenheit. When addressing the economics of issues like wealth inequality, it's easy to fixate on the big picture stuff: taxes, government programs, job opportunities, and financial markets. The small details of city planning and petty law enforcement may seem insignificant in comparison, but consider 2 children from 2 households, each living on opposite sides of the latte line. One can walk to a local school that will be well established and comparatively well funded. Their parents won't be spending 15 hours a week commuting into work, and when they grow up, they can get a good job in the city that's only a 15-minute train ride from their parents' home. The other has to rely on their already time-poor parents to drive them half an hour to a school outside of the fringes of their development suburb, where they will need to attend after-school care while waiting for a ride home. Universities are over an hour away, and unless they move out on their own early into their careers, they will inherit the same expensive and time-consuming commute as their parents. Who do you think is more likely to end up on this side of the line?